In the past on this show, you've mentioned Great Britain and Australia as teams that could potentially give the U.S. some trouble. So what's the biggest threat? Who is the biggest threat to the U.S. and their gold medal search?
I'm amending that, Herc. I'm going to add Sweden, of course, to that list. I like Sweden a lot. I think that they have shown that they present the most challenges to the United States. They know the U.S. so well, whether it's historically playing in major championships or whether it's psychologically because they don't fear the U.S. anymore. You've seen in the 2000 World Cup, 2016 Olympics, they knocked the U.S. out of the Olympics, first time they've ever been knocked out before the medal rounds. So this is a team that feels as if they're ready to pounce. And that's the hardest thing, honestly, against the United States, is even if you can match them physically, there's still that mental barrier of it is the United States and they've won a lot of things. And we've seen it from many other countries, France being one of them. They haven't been able to get over that hurdle. But I think Sweden is close to that because they've lost the fear factor. So I think actually they're their biggest threat. And ironically, of course, it's their first game at the Olympics.
Of course it is. Of course the schedule makers gave us a U.S.-Sweden game to start things off. Look, I want to ask you about this team big picture, because we talk about the strengths and they're overwhelming, and maybe to pick a weakness is nitpicking almost with a group like this, but every team has a weakness or a point of concern. What is that for the U.S., Julie?
That's a good question. I mean, I think people would probably point to that their average age is 30.8. And whether that heat plays a factor in that with some players on the edge of that, in terms of mid-30s, a lot of your core is in your mid-30s. But still, when you look at the numbers and the data and the science behind what these players are producing and the loads they're able to endure, their numbers are great. And so even though, and Vlatko says this all the time, even though Carly is going to be 39 at the Olympics, I don't ever look at her age because her numbers are so good in what she's coming back with when they're testing their loads. So I would say that's what people want to point to, but it's hard to find a weakness with this group. Maybe that right back position not being so deep. Kelly O'Hara struggling with some injuries. We saw on the left side of Mexico having a little bit of success in that first game against the U.S.'s right side. So maybe that's an area that teams can target. O'Hara coming off some ankle injuries and not a lot of depth, as I said. So, but really, I mean, this is as good a U.S. team in terms of depth and creativity with getting Tobin Heath back and hopefully a healthy Rose Lavelle that we've seen in a long time.
You've mentioned age. I'm looking at some of the players, Megan Rapinoe, Lloyd, Sauerbrunn, all over 35 heading into the Olympics. Even Alex Morgan will be 34 at the next World Cup. Does this feel like a last dance sort of situation for this generation of players?
I'm never going to say it's a last dance for anyone because with these players, their longevity, they're crushing, you know, what we used to do. We would get in our 30s and be like, and Herc, you were probably the same way, like, oh, God, you know, getting out of bed hurts.
My 20s were
and
like that.
now it's like Carly, yeah, Carly could play till she's 50. I don't know. I don't know what their limits are anymore. I think they're shattering all of that in a really healthy way. So I would think maybe for Rapinoe, with all that she has on her plate, this is her last go. Carly, I will never say it's her last go because that will come back to me. Maybe Becky Sauerbrunn, the same. But with the delay of the Olympics, you know, it used to be World Cup, Olympics, and then you had a 3-year gap, and that was a hard turn. That was a slog. And so there were a lot of players who would retire after the Olympics because they're like, I can't go another 3-year stretch. But with it being just around the corner almost, you're like, yeah. Maybe I could do it. So who knows? Maybe a little of them will hold on. But I do think they got to start infusing youth into this system. They got to get the Macarios in there, the Davidsons in there. They got to get more youth in there so that they can give them that experience to replace this really great, experienced group.
Julie, in our production meeting before the show, Herc and I were kind of trying to brainstorm, right? Trying to think, like, who's going to be the top scorer on this U.S. women's national team at the Olympics. And unlike a lot of teams, there's not an obvious answer. I think there's probably 3 really good choices and maybe 4 or 5 that you could say, hey, are probably going to score in this tournament, and if they get hot, could absolutely load them up. I think it's probably between Megan Rapinoe, Alex Morgan, and Kristen Press. Who do you think will end up being the leading scorer at this Olympic Games for the U.S.?
That's a good question. I like Press and the way she's playing right now and the momentum. I think the stat I had written down, I don't have my sheet in front of me, was, 17 goals in the last 20 assists sounds about, 20 games, is that about right?
Yep.
17 goals or assists in the last 20 games? I don't know. I'm looking at Adrian saying, help me. But she's been good, really good, and confident in front of goal. And I think Lindsey Horan, this is, if she's not playing in that deeper role with the 6, if Ertz is back in and she gets a little bit higher, that first strike you saw out of her, that's what she can do, which we saw today. So I like Lindsey Horan a lot. And who knows, with Tobin Heath, how she's looked, she took her first touch in that first game back after 6 months and scored. So there's another threat for you right there. So they're come from all over the place, which is another strength of the U.S.
All right. I wanted to say Alex Morgan, but I'll say Carly Lloyd because I don't want her to come at me, and I like Carly Lloyd a lot. And she's been scoring goals in bunches and has that potential, so I will go there. I did want to ask you, so it's gold or bust, right? It's the U.S. women's national team are the favorites, and they have to win, or this is a fracaso. It is a failure.
Yes, that's how it works with us, and that's fine. We like that pressure. I say we because that was always how it was with us. So, yeah, and it really is that incredible standard of we want to be on the top of that podium. And honestly, it's where we should be as a country. We have more women playing, more girls playing, more funding, more support, more grassroots than any other country by a mile. And so we go into these tournaments with that advantage, and we should take that and we should run with it. It's not to say that other countries aren't getting better, because they absolutely are, which is a great thing for women's soccer. But it's still the reality that a lot of countries don't have the support that we have in the United States, or the depth, or the funding. And so we go in with that mindset, and it's not a pressure, it's just an expectation. And it's not a hubris either. It's not this overconfidence. It's just the reality of we're going in and we think we can win it.
And Julie, something I like that you pointed out on the broadcast, I think we kind of heard it from Vlatko as well. Another advantage for the U.S. in this tournament is the decision to go to 22. As Julie's alluded to like a million times, there's not a deeper pool in the world when it comes to women's soccer than the U.S. So the fact that they can add 4 more super high-quality players is a definite advantage to this team going to Tokyo. I don't think you can overstate just how big that is for the U.S.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.